Take Command is a new book released by Dale Carnegie. The book features leadership stories from our podcast guests, as well as young, up-and-coming professionals. Published by Simon & Schuster, Take Command is co-authored by Joe Hart and Michael Crom. Visit takecommand.com for more details and to buy the book. Now to our latest episode.
Welcome to Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast, the show where we seek to uncover what leadership means in today's world. I'm Joe Hart, CEO of Dale Carnegie, and we will be talking to diverse leaders with stories to tell across various industries to help unlock your potential for success. We will be sharing real-life insights into leadership, which in turn can help spark the next level of your growth as a leader. Today's guest is a highly skilled software engineer and technology expert specializing in cloud computing, big data, and software development. With over 20 years of experience, she has played a pivotal role in shaping the commercial, sales, and strategic direction of a prominent global tech leader, particularly within the multi-billion-dollar cloud computing sector. Beyond her professional achievements, she is a vocal advocate for human rights and leadership responsibility. For a decade, she served on the boards of notable nonprofit organizations such as Seattle MESA and the Seattle YMCA, supporting homeless youth, special needs foster care, and low-income childcare. Please welcome Corporate Vice President of Azure Infrastructure, Digital and App Innovation at Microsoft, Merrie Williamson. Merrie, welcome to the Dale Carnegie Take Command podcast.
Thanks, Joe, for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's great to see you. You are the Corporate Vice President of Azure Infrastructure, Digital and App Innovation at Microsoft. And, what's really incredible to me is what a fundamental platform Azure is for so many things that Microsoft does, maybe the number one or two Microsoft initiatives. So before we get into anything else, can you just kind of in a very simple way explain what Azure is and what your role is?
Yes, Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform for enterprises to run their business, which used to be primarily not in the cloud or provided by Microsoft, but in the past, they'd had to build their own from scratch capabilities to run their business. Now they're borrowing from easy to use, pay-as-you-go capabilities, whether that's running their new business website for consumers or building a better way to track their supply chain or understand their end-to-end initiatives around sustainability. This gives you the flexibility to do that, not just for your business in a single location, but globally and consistently and securely. And so think of it as renting the best technologies on the planet that can scale at your needs instantaneously on a trusted platform that Microsoft takes care of 24/7, 365 days a year.
Yeah, and it's something we've used as Dale Carnegie. It's a very significant part of our infrastructure and our platform, so certainly it's important to us. Tell us a little bit. You are the corporate vice president. You focus on sales leadership, one of the top people in the Microsoft organization around Azure. Before we get there, tell us about you. You're an engineer by background. You were into that field. You switched over, but tell us about your background and what led you to where you are today.
I think my professional background's one piece. I went to University of Michigan, go Blue, and got a couple of
another Wolverine.
Yeah. Building things was really interesting to me. So manufacturing engineering, went to Intel, one of the coolest manufacturing environments on the planet with clean rooms and bunny suits and physics that'll be mind-blowing when you get into them. So I was really kind of geeked out by making really advanced products that had the, high-tech nature, but also the people, the process, the tools, the business side of things. How do you optimize that, especially in the earliest days of kind of math modeling and stochastic processes moving to, computer models. Anyway, I went into manufacturing at Intel, found my way out of manufacturing after a couple of years as I was looking for things that were really kind of pushing me outside of the norm. I felt like there was a lot of folks who really, really were good at either making chips or thinking about the PC business. And I was looking for places that were new. And so went into our emerging telco business, learned a lot about what was going to happen. And this is the early 2000s. what was kind of on the horizon with telephony and the internet coming together, which sounds normal today, but then was like science fiction. I work with companies doing voice over IP, again, science fiction at the time. There was a company called Skype and nobody knew what was going to happen and why were people using free phones. That didn't make sense. And so I kind of got this bug to follow that type of pattern and ended up being part of early conversations on media, on high performance kind of video media, which led to the cloud, grid computing in the cloud. And then I've been in kind of different areas of cloud computing on the technical side, building architectures, platforms, kind of M&A around new cloud technologies. And then at the latter part of my career at Intel, because I'd spent time incubating a lot of new businesses, working directly with customers and building those relationships, I went into sales, which was very eye-opening. And I can talk a little bit about that probably later, of my very big empathy moment. And it was really a fun shift, quite a significant shift for an engineering leader. And then followed that to Microsoft. At Microsoft, I had an opportunity to go from kind of a deeper set of technologies that we were selling into the ecosystem, the supply chain of cloud, to the actual customers. I talked to hundreds of customers of all different types that are looking at both technology and the business transformation capabilities as you move to cloud. So I'm now a sales leader and a sales executive, but I have one foot in kind of my old world. I work closely with our engineering leadership to shape the way the customer voice is heard and part of our planfulness of what do we prioritize, and then one foot in a kind of day-to-day strategy and execution in sales.
Merrie, tell us a little bit about your background and how we were raised.
Yeah, I talked a little about my professional background, but I think what's more interesting, I feel like I have a bit of a unique situation as someone who is born outside the United States. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. I was adopted at a very young age, basically at birth, by a white family American couple who primarily were Italian-American New Yorkers, and grew up from my youngest age into college, really more identifying as part of that family with the knowledge that I was Latin American, which was great, embraced and part of the story. But I really didn't live an experience that other people of color lived. And I'm a pretty brown-skinned, black-haired, ethnic looking person. So when I went to university at 17, 18 years old, it was an awakening. In part, I realized without that privilege of being with my family physically, I was living a new life and had a different identity based on what people saw of me. And it really has shaped from that moment through college and beyond, really trying to understand and being a little maybe more aware of how people see me, how people have almost conflicts and visceral responses sometimes where they expect me to say one thing or look one way or answer something. I can be an anomaly. I think it gives me a lot of compassion and empathy for people who are struggling with trying to figure out, why do people have different experiences? Because I had very different experiences and lived experiences at different parts of my life and went through that almost a gauntlet of intensity in a short amount of time, being part of different communities, Hispanic community in college and Black community, as well as the white community, which I felt an alliance to. So I had a different story than some others. And, certainly today in my lived experience in the United States is I'm very much treated as a Black woman. And, that comes with different types of stories in the workplace and outside.
I'm curious, when you talked about the gauntlet, you started on one side and you kind of came out on another side, so to speak. How did you process that for yourself at that time? And was that hard for you at the time to deal with the changed environment, changed worlds, being in college and meeting people who are seeing you in a different way at that time?
Yes, it was very difficult. I was ill-prepared. I was ignorant. So it was almost, I don't know, better or worse. I wasn't raised with a lot of knowledge of what was happening in Black history in the United States. I didn't have kind of the cultural IQ of music, TV, books, history. There was no storytelling. So at 17 or 18, showing up to a school that had a great representation, especially from Michigan and the Detroit area, people expected me to speak almost a language that I couldn't speak and have a shared experience I didn't have because of the way I looked. And so on one hand, it felt great to be embraced by this community, but also I was an outsider. That was hard. And, how am I this person that can say, oh, I've had the same experiences of you when I didn't. Over time, my experiences became more shared. I became more familiar with, more unconscious, conscious bias stories where I didn't feel safe, stories where I felt an outsider. It was great actually to have the community to use as a sounding board, that it wasn't just me, that it was more systemic, and just even having a language to all of those things. But it was awkward. I felt like I was almost dropped in another country where people expected me to know all of these norms, languages, and history I just didn't know. And it's actually been decades of me really leaning in and trying to catch up with, I'd say, the Black American experience, as much as I still identify with the Latinx community. And then there's the obviously overlap of the Latinx and Black communities too, which is another piece of rich history based on where I'm coming from originally, as well as, colleagues and folks around the world who live outside the United States and share their experiences. So it was hard then. It's less hard now because, again, I get the platform to have conversations, connect with other amazing people, and together we feel empowered to change something. So that feels really good.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think one of my favorite parts of this show is being able to really get to know people. And thank you for sharing that part of yourself. So I'm curious, you talked about the empathy moment. I can't help but think to myself, you really were heavily invested in the engineering side of things. And all of a sudden you get to this pivot point in your career where maybe you could stay and you could go deeper into that, or you could really do something completely different. And often we have that opportunity in our career to kind of go into a completely different direction. What was the empathy moment, and what was that decision like for you? Was it a hard decision? Was it a gut check for you? What was the empathy moment?
It was a hard decision on one hand, because it really took me out of the career ladder I envisioned for myself, which was more, I'd say, traditional general manager. I want to become a product leader, and then a product and engineering, and then a dev test to that, and then go to market and standards. Like I kept building my GM toolbox. And then I had two leaders at the company kind of virtually knock on my door and say, hey, this is a job you need to take. You need to hold the bag. I'd never heard that term before. I said, I don't know what holding the bag is. And they're like, well, you haven't delivered revenue. And I said, yes, I have. I've built these things and they deliver revenue. They go, no, you got to go have this experience. It's good for you to have this experience to keep building your toolbox. I wasn't convinced out of the gate, but I thought, okay, this is definitely going to give me a new set of skills to take back. It was like, I'm just going to do this for a couple of minutes and then take it back and get back on my path. That was the initial plan. And I'll tell you my empathy moment. I've gotten up in front of thousands of sellers and told this story. I went home when I made the decision and I told my husband, good news. I'm going to take this new job. It's going to be the easiest job I've ever had. I was so proud as an engineer that we built things that just sold themselves. They were industry leading. We had high market share. We were so smart in engineering. We knew everything. Sellers, they did the golf and the thing and the handshakes and the paper, super easy job. And I did tell him that. I said, for the first time in years, I'm gonna be home at 5:00. This is gonna be great. Spend some time with the family. And he's like, okay, sure, great. And then I take this job. And of course, it was eye-opening, to say the least, the amount of work and human intersect of technical decisions. I was totally blown away. The fact that customers who want your product, who want to make a change, still struggle with the sales process, with integrating and onboarding and taking all this new technology and dealing with legacy, all of the intricate things that happen just in business at the edge, like the things that you just don't think about when you're in the headquarters, that pieces of paper get lost, customs things I'd never heard of. I had to learn how to deal with a new human element of leadership when sellers get paid differently. They're motivated differently. Every month they're like, fix my pay. My compensation's messed up. And I'm like, what? I only dealt with this once a year before. Now I have to deal with it once a week. I learned CRM systems and I'm like, oh my God, what? These are challenging to deal with. And everyone's kind of bane of their existence in sales is, how do you make the perfect CRM scenario? So I learned so much and I gained so much empathy about how hard it was selling something that people wanted and understood, much less things that were newer in our portfolio. And then you had to even build more muscle. And just you hear things as an engineer and you don't connect with them like trust, customers trust us. And truly, that is the human element of how you show up at a customer is your sales team. They're the ones calling and saying, I will deliver this. I will deliver it on time. I will make sure that you're in a situation as a human to be successful because you're betting on us. Like, I just didn't see that from my other point of view. So it's been huge. And in that role, the funny story is I thought I knew all the roles. And so I was like, okay, now I'm going to be a great seller. I have my friends in engineering. I knew people in marketing. I'm all good. These people came knocking at my door, sending me emails, wanting to have meetings, asking me to fill out PowerPoints. And I was like, who are these people? Why are they distracting my team? Why are they landing new edicts on us? And it turns out those people were corp sales. And corp sales kind of hovers around and helps you be successful / can get in your way. And I was very pointy and annoyed in general at that function. I didn't think they were really well connected. And so I ended up getting a seat at the table and helping them see what I was seeing. And when Microsoft came knocking and they're like, knock, 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 I have this corp sales role, I was like, oh my gosh, karma. And so when I got up on stage and introduced myself, I said, and so because I've lived in your seats and I didn't love when corp came knocking, I'm going to make sure we only show up when it's valuable to you. And I'm not going to bother you unless I know it's value add, and we're going to listen, and we're not going to be the ivory tower. And so that's kind of my empathy story. It lands, I think, well, it gives me a center, right? You know, what would I do if I was back in my old role? Then I get to play what would I do if I was in engineering? Because sometimes we get those prickly first impressions, and it's easy to see where they're coming from.
Well, it's interesting to hear your story because certainly, we go through life, we've got different opinions about different things or whatnot. We think we know. And then, what you really did, you experienced that. You went and you listened and learned. You're like, oh my gosh, I really didn't know what I didn't know. I'm curious because one of the things we teach in Dale Carnegie is the importance of interpersonal skills, right? I mean, so you can have someone with deep technical skills, but if you don't have interpersonal skills, we're limited. How did your interpersonal skills serve you in that transition, or did you need to do anything to develop those skills? Did you find that you had what it took, or did you have to go out and learn how to be in that world a little bit?
Yeah, I think it was a really, maybe with empathy, there's a good dose of humility because I'd grown very confident in myself as a technical leader and, prided myself of being one of the smartest people in the room because I felt like I had to be. And now all of a sudden, I was absolutely not the smartest person in the room. I had 0 years of sales experience and everyone around me had 20 to 30. And so, I think the big mental shift was, how do I become a voracious learning leader? And how do you think about that? And how do you show up with your team authentically? And then how do you find space to learn? Because I think one of the things I see in especially senior leadership roles is you don't necessarily get the same onboarding grace that others might get. And so you got to carve that out for yourself. So I do this today, and I asked for this when I came to Microsoft, is really, riding along and shadowing people who are doing things well, who are known for their expertise in a certain area, especially those interpersonal, how are they delivering a message? How are they dealing with difficult challenges, whether they're complex deals or technical portfolio challenges or whatever they are. A lot of people are generous with their time and will say yes to just having you by their side.
Yeah. And often they're happy to do that. Mm-hmm. I have found, at different stages of my career, you get to a certain level where you feel confident and you feel comfortable, and all of a sudden you do something different. You're resetting. It's almost like you're a senior in high school, now you're a freshman in college or something like that. It's exactly. A whole reset. It seems like there are always people around who really relish and enjoy helping other people up. And there's also an opportunity for us to do that for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people love sharing their experience and then seeing other people almost as sounding boards. Does that make sense? Whether there's people who are deeply technical, who have experience, on the people side, things that I didn't think about until I was in the middle of it, learning so much about the human element of org design from my HR colleagues who have decades of experience thinking about this ahead of, what I would need to really sit back and look at how do you think about these things. So just being open to that too. I think modern leadership in terms of being open. One of the things I'm still learning about and almost relearning, and I have a peer group of leaders of my generation who are kind of in this transitional state. I have role models who are incredible, 10, 15, 20 years ahead of me that I looked up to, but I feel like we were in a management hierarchy then where they were the top of the triangle. And they had to be all-knowing, trusted. They knew the right answer. They always showed up polished, kind of bulletproof. And in particular, as a female leader, when I saw other female leaders, they were conforming to a norm, right? There was no difference between a female leader identity and a male leader identity. Everyone was the same, right? You kind of all showed up the same. And no one questioned, like whatever that was coming on high, we heard those things. It all trickled down and then everyone executed. And especially me coming from manufacturing, it's literally books were written about this, like Kanban and Toyota's way and all this stuff of like the top creates the direction, the bottom executes. And when I think about what I've experienced over the last couple of years, in part because of the Microsoft culture and growth mindset and learning through these big leaps in my career, but also the type of business I'm in this kind of cloud platform, it forces everyone to look differently at assumptions of the past. And now I think about leadership in a flip triangle model, where the knowledge base is at the bottom, right? Because the bottom is your experts, like the people working for me, the people in sales, the people in the engineering teams working on the day-to-day are the smartest people. And then how do you then sense, aggregate, and empower those people through managers who aren't telling them what to do, but coaching them, giving them guardrails, asking them what they do, aligning to, 5 or 6 principles of the business, and then getting really good at extracting the best value of those humans who are the experts. And then my job, but now the bottom of the pyramid, is to be really, really good at listening, synthesizing, and making decisions based on all of almost this like physical funnel coming into me versus being an expert, because I can't be as expert at all of the things these folks are doing. So the new way for me to think about showing up as a leader is like, how do you get good at this thing, which is very different than the thing that my people that I've looked up to for so long seem to demonstrate with decades and decades before that.
I love what you're saying. I think it's completely true. I've had the same experience, Merrie, which is, you think going into leadership means there's a certain model and, you have to have the answers. You've got to appear strong, all these different things. And the reality is, as a leader, we're not going to know more than a lot of the people who we're working with. Those people are going to have the answers. You also said something earlier in our discussion about, I think it's a key word, which is humility. There's a humility in leadership, which, clearly you've demonstrated. I think great leaders demonstrate, which is, I don't have all the answers. How do I get this out from other people? How do I bring out the best in other people? So, what you're saying really resonates with me. With that in mind, if you were to think about a definition of leadership, what does leadership mean to you? If you had a sentence for summarizing kind of what it means to you, what would that be?
The first thing is it requires a practice of knowing yourself and then listening and communicating exceptionally well, making decisions with courage and clarity, and then having systematic ways of bringing others along with you. But I think the hardest part's the first.
Let's go through that piece by piece. So go through the first piece, if you would, again, please.
So the first piece is this practice of knowing yourself. I've learned this, I think, from looking inwards in my own experience, but also mentoring and coaching others, is that as a leader, knowing where you're coming from authentically, like who you are. We talk about these words authentically and psychological safety, but like, I think people feel when they look around at leaders and they say, I believe that person. I understand that person. That person shows up consistently. It's because it's not a practice. It's not like an actor on a stage. It's literally who you are. But to show up courageously, consistently means you need to be comfortable in your own skin. You need to say, here are my boundaries. Here are my aspirations. Here is my ambition. I say ambition all the time now because people are like, oh, you can say that out loud. I'm like, yeah, I'm ambitious. Like, you can be ambitious. You cannot be ambitious. It's not a judgment. It's just how I feel. I might not be ambitious 5 years from now, right? And then I might be somewhere else, but I am now. Like, just being really comfortable with who you are, and especially outside of work, because I think that leaders who really know who they are and what's important to them personally, what gives them energy, the important relationships in their life, then I think you earn that credibility to say, okay, this is who I am. Now I want to know who you are, whether it's a leader working for you, whether it's someone working in your organization, whether it's a partner, and saying, now, because I'm willing to share what motivates me and how it's part of the business that we're in, let's go figure out an answer together. And I think the first part is not something I learned growing up in a more structured engineering environment. It's something I've had to listen to, and all these pieces of stories, whether they're old school kind of winning friends and influencing people ideal, or Brene Brown, like it's all kind of breadcrumbs in there. But I don't think up until this generation, it's been as accepted to show up authentically. And we even shared this. I know it's a podcast and people can't see me, but I identify as a woman, but I'm a Black woman. And so like, I have not started my career as someone who felt like I'm going to show up authentically and know who I am, and that's going to be my center. It's something I've grown into. And it's something I coach others who are seeking more leadership of like, do you know where you are starting from before you bring other people along?
It seems like that is ultimately the most important part of leadership, is starting with who we are and being comfortable with ourselves and being our authentic selves. People can tell when we're not being our authentic selves.
Exactly.
It's like, and what are your values and what do you really stand for? Are you living those values? Are you projecting those values? Or are you just trying to be something else? And I don't know, people can tell when you're not that way. So how have you come into that self-confidence, that comfortability, that authentic willingness to reflect as a female person of color in a male-dominated engineering field? I mean, was that challenging? Or what advice would you have for other people who might be trying to be more comfortable with kind of who they are and how to lead with that confidence?
I can say I did it 100% the wrong way for my first 10 years of my career. I worked in, a very male-dominated hardware engineering environment, and felt like, in 2020 hindsight, I think the best way to describe it is camouflage. I wanted to show up every day and hope no one would notice I was different. And even looking back, I dressed myself down in sweats and jeans that didn't fit. I didn't put on makeup. I actually had like an alter ego on the weekends where I was like going out with my friends. And then I'd have my work attire, like literally was like the least authentic I could be. I thought the equation was, I'm just going to work really, really hard and be the smartest person to just keep up, right? And outperform. And I'm going to show people they can't ignore my output. Newsflash for anybody out there, Black women actually stand out in business. There's not many of us in many rooms, and hopefully we'll change that. So I wasn't fooling anyone. And, I think that it was the next part of my career that I realized I needed to embrace it, because I had a voice and I was trying to adapt my voice to be much more amenable to others. And it was really limiting what impact I wanted to have, just literally my voice. I had to shift the way I presented my ideas, the rooms that I needed to be in, the aggressiveness I had in saying, I want a role that's going to push me harder. And I think that's where I started learning by having those one-to-one conversations with peers. I really leaned heavily on our ERGs, women in tech, and the Black tech networks in my companies I was in as sounding boards, utilized a lot of their kind of breakouts to listen and get coaching and get ideas on peer mentoring and executive presence and all those things I learned more in those communities than I did independently. I think that's where I started building my voice to go back to even more senior managers and people I trusted and say, I believe you see something in me, and, early kind of design of sponsorship. Will you help me get to this place? How do I get to this place? Will you invest in me? And those are the people who really helped reshape my career, probably mid-career, and said, given our conversation, this is your new job. You're going to do this new big thing. I'm going to put you out there in something very uncomfortable. That was really the place where I got permission from others to say, no, this is how you can start acting authentically. And then the third part of my story is Microsoft, where a big decision for me to move from my career at Intel, which was fantastic, to Microsoft was opportunity. It was just a great opportunity to lead in such a global way, but also the culture, like probably first the culture, which was, okay, I want to go somewhere where I don't feel like as a woman in tech and a Black woman in tech, I'm going backwards, but I certainly want somewhere that I can continue to expand my own impact and my own voice. And certainly have found that here. But it's been, testing my courage, talking about things I wouldn't have talked about 5 years ago, showing up as somebody telling stories that make people uncomfortable, bringing together people to have uncomfortable conversations and hoping for the best, that, people take it with the right intent. And so it's a journey for sure. I'm still working on it.
But it's a great thing, that you have found this level of comfort in doing that? Because it seems like, I mean, things work out. A lot of times we're afraid of certain things happening. And what if I say this? What if I present this way or whatnot? But it's just ultimately, if it's who we are, that's the most important part of our, living authentically, if you will. I mean, I just remember early in my career, gosh, in my early 30s, thinking I didn't know a thing. And that was kind of a tough place to be. But as you get older and you get confidence and you do different things, you realize that you've got that kind of inner ability and strength and so forth. You're like, hey, I can do this. So that some of that takes time. But, going back to what you experienced, you went through different stages. I'd be interested to know, if you were to talk to yourself earlier in your career, a younger version of yourself, what advice might you give that younger Merrie, knowing everything that you know today?
I spent a lot of energy. I guess the word it would be covering, but it was the 1,000 little decisions you make to make other people comfortable with you during a day. Pulling into the parking lot and turning off your music. Typically, when I tell a Black audience that, everyone nods their heads. You don't want to leave an impression. The clothing, big earrings. One thing you can't see on my podcast is I have big curly hair. I did not have big curly hair for most of my career. These are 3 super small examples, but the 8-hour days, the 10-hour days that I lived, I made these little micro decisions all day. And how much more productive could I have been as a human being, as a friend, as a daughter, as a spouse, as an employee, if I didn't spend any of that energy on those things that really have no value, and spent that energy on learning, helping others, making an impact in the world. And so I didn't have that permission and coaching at that point in my career. So it would have been interesting to see what more I had to give, because I felt like I was giving everything. And I wonder, was it 10% or 20% time or more that I was burning bad energy?
We worry so much, especially I did in the earlier part of my career when I was younger. You think everyone's focused on you and thinking about
No one's focused on you. You're the only one focused on you.
I've had this conversation with one of my kids the other day. It's like, you go to a party and what are we worried about? Worried about ourselves, how we look. And what's everyone else worried about? They're worried about how they look. And no one really cares. And you and I were talking a little bit before we started about, get a little bit of a life experience. You realize we worry about so many things that really aren't that important. So if we can free up that energy and just move forward with confidence and that sense of, things are going to work out. And if we learn from something, we can be okay. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. And then everyone else is in the same boat, not just whether you're early career and everyone's early career. The difference between early, mid, and late career is experience, but everyone's still human. I told a story and someone thought it was worth mentioning again because it didn't strike me, but a couple of months ago, maybe in the fall, there was a gathering. Satya Nadella, our CEO, was going to have just a really simple cocktail gathering or tea gathering. I don't remember, but it was the first time since COVID that we had something like this in our HQ in Redmond, and prioritizing on my calendar. It'd be great to see people in person. Over the weekend, I start getting pings, through our IM. Are you going? Are you going? Are you gonna meet me there? And these are just humans. It was a couple women I knew, and some newer to the company, some newer to being CVP. And anyway, I mentioned this to somebody and kind of offhand, and they said, "Oh my God, you guys do that too?" I'm like, we're all human. No one wants to be in the room by themselves sitting alone. It doesn't matter what your title is. We're all human. And then we all checked and what was your outfit you're wearing? And because no one wanted to show up overdressed or underdressed. And it's a human moment. Everyone's looking to be accepted and not be silly. And
it's true. I think that's one thing that can give us all comfort is that, like you said, we're all in this together. What are you most excited about as you think about the future?
I thought about this when I took a leap of faith to join Microsoft after being in a company for 20 years. And if you step back and look at the internet, and we all adore the internet, over the last 20 years, it's still in its infancy in its ability to impact the world. So when I think about things like the lowering of barriers to get information, the kind of Wikipedia, amazing. Businesses that have been transformed, travel, right? The fact that my kids are never lost. Those things are great parts of the internet era. Social media, maybe we can put that in a different bucket. But the same technologies, the cloud, this big structure that you can use technology in a new and lower barrier to entry way, hasn't really hit businesses that impact humanity. right? Manufacturers who are working with us and the market at large to manufacture things smarter and more sustainable. This is what is going to happen next. Hospital systems who are ripe for transformation, and technology is going to play a huge impact into everything from the way we deal with drugs, drug science, costs, simulating things, all the way to the experience in a hospital setting. All of these things, we're just on the cusp of seeing how this can happen. So I'm a rabid optimist to see where all of this is going. And I feel super humble, I guess, that I get to see all of these kind of chess pieces moving on the table. And then my job at the end of the day, even though I still think of myself as a technologist first, is human. It's going into those companies and saying, how can you make the change towards a vision in a way that gets you there? And it's not even fast. Speed is one element, but also authenticity. Some companies aren't ready to move as fast as others. They have businesses they're running that are massive, and they have to do change in a way that implements change at an appropriate pace, technology at an appropriate pace. Some others are far behind and they want like coaching to go faster. And so it's really kind of showing up authentically again to drive those end states. And the other thing too is companies, as much as like big business gets that brand of big business, a lot of people I meet with are mission driven in these changes, no matter where they're coming from. I've actually met with so many companies in like the energy, oil and gas space, traditional companies where they get branded in these certain ways, but all of them are just excited about the green energy transformation, how it's going to build business. It's an eventuality, and they want technology to get there faster. So a lot of optimism out there.
And it's incredible too. You think about, there's a whole technology piece as we think about the future. In many ways, we're just really getting started. I think about all the things you just said, and then there's AI. I had this conversation with my kids about, they grew up with a certain level of technology that I hadn't,
Right.
You grew up without the internet, you grew up without cell phones. And I think in the years ahead, it'll be, their kids are going to be saying, you grew up without AI, you grew up without robots, all these different things. Certainly, there's a technology piece that's exciting as we think ahead. And Microsoft is such an incredible company. And to be a part of that, it's got to be exciting. The human piece of this is going to continue to be important. How we interact with each other, how we relate to each other with the technology changes. And, how do we continue to do that? How we do that will be so important. We asked you about moving forward, kind of what you see moving forward, what you're excited about. What about when you look backwards? What do you want your legacy to be as a leader?
I think it's an easy and hard question. Mostly it's hard because I'm still working on it, but easy in that I want to build organizations, cultures that, exist after I retire or go do my next thing that I would have loved to have had in my early career, throughout my career. One that anybody can show up, feel out of the gate, whatever you are authentically, however you show up authentically in the moment. We trust you, we trust your talent, we trust your potential, and we're here to support you. And that there's a language and a framework that's super consistent, not beholden to a manager or a VP, but that is the new normal. And that's really what I want to, inspire others to see, that this is not just one person, me, my peers at Microsoft, but it's really required in a world where people have choice. And I think this next generation of talent is going to show up with the expectation that they want to be treated as human beings, not as commodities. So we better get really good at this. I don't think it's optional, but I also think it's really enriching as a leader to think about things less about yourself and more about like a coach and a teacher. I get a lot of personal energy from seeing people just have the permission to have a voice, have the permission to lead a conversation, have the permission to go lead a business, and watch them just thrive. It's amazing.
Well, it's interesting, just even going back, you were talking about culture. You were attracted to Microsoft because of the culture, and great cultures attract great people. So to be a leader who is contributing to a culture, that's something that's creating the sustainability, right? That's going to draw more people to it. As long as we continue to work on the culture. And again, I go back to so many things that Dale Carnegie teaches about, respecting and appreciating and listening and valuing other people and trying honestly to see things from another person's point of view. You started this conversation with empathy, with the empathy moment, and empathy is just such a critical factor for all of us. But if we do that and we have those kinds of cultures, then we can bring out the best in other people and continue to have thriving companies and environments and organizations.
Yeah, and I think that the talent will follow. I mean, I've seen that for our organization, is that the business of Azure, which I think is appealing to many, but I think beyond that, it's how do you draw in talent that wants to be somewhere where they can perform at their best, but also be understood if they're having a human moment, if they need to take a break. In my organization and the organization around me, my boss is exceptional at this, is role modeling, vacating during vacations, being very specific about driving space so that you can have energy moments, whether that's within your day and having boundaries, having time to step back and using meditate tools. These are all things I'm learning, by the way. But also, when you vacate, you need to. We require you to go vacate to get energy to go do the hard job we're asking you to go do. I think it's appealing for people not just to see it and have leaders kind of checking a box and saying, go do that, but I'm going to work myself to death. But really role modeling, it's part of that authenticity we talked about earlier.
100%. We can't, on the one hand, say, listen, it's really important for you to kind of restore yourself, go take a vacation, tune out. And then when I'm on vacation as the leader, the boss, not do the same thing.
Exactly.
That's called hypocrisy. And none of us want to be guilty of hypocrisy. So any closing pieces of advice for our listeners?
I think that it's easy in a world of the things that we surround ourselves with. I think of social media, but just news, to be a pessimist, right? To feel like there's almost a hopelessness around us sometimes. And as a leader, you got to tap into that energy to find optimism and generate that in yourself first and really concentrate on that. And I think that draws in other people. I think we all are wired to find hope and optimism and potential. And whether you're going to build a company or be part of a company, I think being mission driven is all part of that equation of we all want to know that we're making a positive impact somewhere. So I would just say that even with headwinds, we got to find our energy.
Well, if we do that, if we find our energy and we remain open to what's possible, then we can have incredible futures. But if we're focused just on what's not going to work or the negative or the worst possible things that are going to happen, we'll get those kind of results too. So Merrie, wonderful to have you with me today. It's been truly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.
In today's Thought Leadership Spotlight segment, our guest reflects on the importance of being an empathetic leader by applying one of the Dale Carnegie principles and approaching situations with an open mind. Like Merrie Williamson, our guest, he explains how observant leaders can ensure that you see things from the other person's perspective and ultimately flourish in your career. Please welcome President and owner of Dale Carnegie, Washington State and Idaho, Travis Daniel.
It was a Monday afternoon, right around 4 p.m. I was just getting ready to leave the office, and I get a meeting request from my manager, vice president of sales, says, meeting tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. We need to talk about the next steps in your career. Of course, he wasn't in the office at the time, so I couldn't go in and ask him what it was about. What do I need to be prepared for? I ended up leaving the office frustrated, worried. My body became tense. I finally said to myself, Travis, you can't assume. Just go to the meeting tomorrow and find out what it's about. That next morning, walked into his office, sat down. He said, Travis, we want you to project manage a new initiative for the company around building a corporate website that's going to help us increase sales. Said, you'll be collaborating with IT and our customers. Are you interested? I said, yeah, I'm interested. This is a really exciting initiative, but why me, Brian? I have no experience in building websites. I've never collaborated with IT before. What are you expecting? He says, Travis, I believe in you. I believe in your potential, and I'm here to support you. Are you in? I said, of course, let's do it. The project ended with great success. We're able to increase revenues and even build our client base. Reflecting on this reminds me of when we have leaders around us that believe in us, see our potential, we need to authentically listen. When we apply Dale Carnegie's principle, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view, we increase our potential exponentially.
Join us and order a copy of Take Command in hardcover, ebook, or audiobook format at your favorite bookseller or at takecommandbook.io. Also, you can visit takecommand.com for more information about the book and additional resources. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast. Check out our resources page at www.dalecarnegie.com for more research, insight, and tools that will support your success in taking command of your leadership potential. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating it and subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us for the next episode of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast.